The wind that winter sang through the high canyons like a lonely spirit, low and mournful, carrying the scent of snow and pine pitch. Sam Coulter leaned against the doorway of his cabin, one shoulder bowed beneath a threadbare coat, watching the light fade across the white ridges. It had been weeks since he'd seen another living soul. Even the coyotes were quiet, too thin to waste their voices on howling. He had come to the White Mountains years ago, chasing gold, then solitude, and finally just the silence. A man could live out his life there if he didn't mind the cold and could stomach the loneliness. Sam had made peace with both. His traps kept him fed, his fire kept him sane. But that winter the snow came early and heavy, burying everything but the stubborn. He had started counting his firewood by the hour instead of the day. It was near dusk when he first heard the sound, faint, sharp, carried by the wind. At first he thought it was an animal, maybe a wounded elk calling from the timberline. But then it came again, higher this time, tremulous, human, a cry for help. He hesitated. The storm was thickening, and a man didn't wander far in such weather unless he meant to freeze. But the sound came again, desperate now, and something old inside him, the part that still remembered kindness, pushed him forward. He took his rifle and a lantern and trudged into the trees. The snow swallowed his boots. The pines leaned heavy with frost. For a long while he saw nothing but white and shadow, until he stumbled upon two figures half, buried in a drift, girls, both of them, wrapped in rags stiff with ice. They were little more than skin and bone, eyes wide with that wild animal fear that comes when the body is too cold to run any more. One tried to stand when she saw him, but her legs gave out. The other just stared, lips blue and cracked, whispering something in a language Sam hadn't heard in years. He knelt beside them, felt for breath, and found it thin but there. Without thinking, he lifted the smaller one into his arms, then the other, and carried them back through the storm. By the time he reached his cabin, his beard was crusted white with ice, and his arms burned from the weight. Inside, he laid them near the fire and wrapped them in his blanket. He poured a cup of coffee, though it had long gone weak and bitter, and spooned the last of his beans into a pot. The smell filled the little room, rich and smoky. One of the girls stirred, eyes flicking open. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "Eat," Sam said softly, handing her the tin plate. They ate like creatures starving, which they were. When the food was gone, they slept, huddled close like pups. Sam sat by the fire and watched them, wondering where they had come from and who they'd lost. The next morning, the smaller girl, the one with hair black as obsidian, told him her name, Naylin. Her sister, older by a year or two, was Tajai. Their words came haltingly in a mix of Apache and English. Sam gathered enough to know they'd fled some violence down south. Raiders, soldiers, maybe both. Their people scattered, their trail lost in snow. He didn't ask more. There were things a man didn't need to make them say. Days passed. The storm held them captive together. Sam trapped snowshoe rabbits, taught the girls how to skin and cook them. They learned fast, quicker than any white child he'd ever seen. In the evenings, Naylin would hum softly near the fire, the tune thin but beautiful, like wind through reeds. Taj, I watched everything, eyes sharp and wary, her hands never far from the hatchet Sam had let her use. When the thaw finally came, the creek began to sing again beneath the ice. The sisters spoke of leaving. They would go north, they said, to find what family might remain. Sam nodded, though something in his chest tightened. He packed them dried meat, flint, and his only spare blanket. They left at dawn. He watched from the doorway as their small shapes disappeared between the pines, not once looking back. The mountains swallowed them the way they swallowed everything. When he went inside, he found a bundle on his table, strips of venison smoked and tied neat with sinew. Beside it, an eagle feather leaned against the doorframe, glinting in the morning light. Sam set it on the mantel. For years afterward, it stayed there untouched, unspoken, the only color in that quiet cabin. And though the pines still whispered the same lonely song, he never again thought of the forest as empty, because somewhere out there, he knew, two lives he had once fed were still moving through the wild, carrying a piece of his fire with them. 15 years passed, and the White Mountains changed. The trails Sam Coulter once walked alone were now marked by hooves and rumor. Settlers had come and gone, miners had left their holes behind, and whispers filled the saloons about a new Apache warband that rode the high country. But these weren't like the raiders the army spoke of in fear. These warriors hunted different prey. Men who preyed on others. Bandits vanished. Rustlers who stole from the poor disappeared into the canyons. Even soldiers who treated the tribes with cruelty found their supply lines cut, their camps raided without bloodshed, but with humiliating precision. Folks started calling them the Sisters of the Storm. Sam heard it all from traders who stopped by his cabin. He listened, half interested, half wary. He'd long since given up prospecting and made his living mending traps and furs, trading pelts for flour and tobacco. His beard had gone white as snow, his shoulders stooped, but his eyes were still sharp. He didn't say much, and no one expected him to. The men who passed through thought he was half ghost already, that winter was mild, the air carrying a strange calm. Sam had a feeling in his bones, the same feeling that comes before a storm, though the sky stayed clear. He tried to ignore it, but it clung to him, a whisper that wouldn't quiet. One night, while the fire burned low and the wind pressed against the cabin walls, the dogs began to bark. Sam looked up from his work sharpening his old knife, the one with the worn elk horn handle, and listened. Hoofbeats, faint but steady, came from the ridge. 2 horses, then silence. He stood slowly, the old stiffness in his knees making itself known. He took his rifle from the mantel, but didn't cock it. A man didn't survive that long in the mountains by panicking at every sound. Still, something about this silence felt heavy. When the door creaked open, moonlight spilled across the floor. 2 shadows filled the doorway. Sam blinked, the firelight flickering across their faces, and then the years folded like pages in a book. The taller one stepped forward first, and in her eyes he saw something both fierce and familiar. Her hair was braided tight, bound with silver and beads, and her face was painted with black across the cheekbones. Her sister followed close behind, wearing a wolf pelt across her shoulders, her bow slung beside a long rifle that gleamed in the firelight. For a heartbeat, Sam could not find his voice. The younger one, Nayland, smiled first. It was the same small smile she'd given him that day she first ate warm food by his fire. "You remember us, Taj," I said. Her voice had deepened, firm but edged with warmth. Sam's throat tightened. "I fed you." Nayland nodded once, and because of that we lived. The room felt smaller somehow, filled with the ghosts of years. They took off their coats and sat near the fire like they had all those years ago, though this time their movements were deliberate, graceful, measured like those who had known both war and command. They told him stories, their words soft and steady, woven with pauses that carried more weight than sound. After they left his cabin, they said, they wandered for months through lands torn by conflict, soldiers chasing tribes fighting one another, famine pressing them all. They were found by a group of elders from different bands who took them in and taught them not just how to fight, but how to endure. "We learned the way of the hawk," Nayland said, gazing into the fire. "To strike only when the shadow falls right, to protect, not to destroy." "Taj," I leaned forward, her eyes glowing in the light. "We built a new band not for vengeance, but for balance. We took in the broken, the lost, the ones with no place left. We became their sisters. The world knows us now by a name it gave in fear. But what we do for peace." Sam listened quietly, hands folded in his lap. He looked from one to the other and felt something stirring deep within him, pride, maybe, or something close to it. These were no longer the frightened children he'd once carried through the snow. They were the storm now, the kind that cleans the sky after too many dark years. Outside the wind shifted, the horses snorted softly. Sam poured coffee the way he used to, though his hands trembled a little. They drank in silence for a time. "You came back," he said finally. Nalen's eyes softened. "We said we would return when the land was ready for us. It's ready now." "For what?" Sam asked. "Taj," I smiled faintly, "to build beside you, to make something that lasts longer than winter." He wanted to laugh at that, the idea of him, an old man, building anything again. But he saw in their faces that they weren't talking about walls or cabins. They meant something deeper, a way of living, a bridge between the lives that had nearly been lost and the one he'd given them a chance to keep. The night wore on, and the fire sank to embers. They spoke of the mountains, of the people returning to them, of the dream they carried, a place where warriors and wanderers could live without fear, a place where no one starved, no one was hunted, no one forgotten. Sam didn't answer right away. He just watched the flames curl and fade, and thought about that feather still resting above the mantel, untouched all those years. When he finally looked up, the two sisters were watching him quietly. "You always had your fire," Nayland said softly. "Now let us keep it burning with you." And for the first time in 15 winters, Sam Coulter felt something warm inside that had nothing to do with the fire at all. The days that followed their return passed like a long exhale after years of holding breath. Sam Coulter's cabin, once a place of silence and smoke, filled again with the noise of life, the sound of horses at the corral, laughter under the pines, the clang of tools striking wood. Nayland and Tajai moved about the clearing with purpose, speaking in quiet tones to those who came and went. They brought people with them, wanderers, widows, and warriors who had grown tired of war. At first, Sam wasn't sure what to make of it. He had spent so many years alone that the sound of voices in the evening felt strange, almost too much. But every time he saw Nayland kneel to mend a child's moccasin or heard Taj, I teaching a young hunter to track without killing needlessly, the unease in his chest eased a little more. The land seemed to breathe easier too. The forest that had once swallowed every sound now hummed with quiet life. They built new lodges beside Sam's cabin, one to the east, one to the west, so that the first and last light of each day fell across his roof. It was Nayland's idea, a gesture of respect, though Sam told her he didn't need honoring. She only smiled and said, "The sun should greet the one who gave us our first dawn." As the seasons turned, what began as a small gathering became a settlement of its own kind, neither village nor fort, something quieter, older. Hunters from different bands came to trade or seek counsel. A few white men rode in too, roughened by loss and wanting no part of the wars that had ruined everything. Sam watched as they were welcomed without question. Here, no one asked where you came from, only whether you meant harm. It was strange, the way the sisters led. Taj, I was the blade, sharp, direct, a presence that could silence a quarrel with a single glance. Nayland was the quiet current beneath, the one who softened hard tempers and turned anger into purpose. Together they were balanced storm and calm, fire and stillness, and through it all they treated Sam not as elder or chieftain, but as the steady root from which everything had grown. Sam found himself teaching again the way his hands remembered even when his mind forgot. He showed the young ones how to set traps without cruelty, how to find the right bark to make poultices, how to read the sky for coming weather. When his knees would no longer carry him to the ridge, they carried his stories there instead. He laughed more, though the sound was low and rough, like wind through pine boughs. As the years folded, travelers began calling the place the Valley of Two Fires. They said it was because two great flames never went out, one from Sam's cabin, one from the sisters' lodges, burning steady no matter the weather. But those who lived there knew better. The name came from the bond that had started it all, the warmth shared between a starving winter and the man who refused to let it take two lost children. When Sam grew frail, his hands shaking too much to hold a cup, Nayland and Tajai were at his side each morning. They brought him warm broth and sat with him as the sun climbed the ridge. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes not. He liked it better when they didn't. The silence between them meant more than any words could. One night, when the moon was full and the air smelled of rain, Sam asked them what they would do when he was gone. "Keep building, Taj," I said simply. "Keep feeding those the world forgets." Nayland reached for his hand. "And keep your fire burning." He smiled faintly. "It's yours now." He passed in his sleep a few nights later, the fire still crackling beside him. They buried him on the high ridge overlooking the valley, where the eagles circled and the snow melted last each spring. They carved his name into stone with words in two tongues, English and Apache, so all who came after could read it. He gave food to the lost. We gave life to his name. Every year after that, when the first snow fell, Nayland and Tajai would climb the ridge and sit beside his grave until dawn. They brought offerings, meat from the first hunt, feathers, wildflowers, and left them at the stone. The valley below would glow faintly from two fires burning side by side, one near his old cabin, one near theirs. The years went on, and the sisters became legend. Travelers told stories of two Apache women who rode the mountains not as raiders but as guardians, who fed strangers as if they were kin. They said that when storms rolled across the peaks, you could sometimes see a third light flicker among the clouds, the old man's spirit, still watching over the valley he helped create. And though time wore down all things, trails, cabins, even names, the Valley of Two Fires endured. Because once, long ago, a hungry winter met a kind heart, and that small act of mercy grew into something larger than war, larger than grief, a promise kept by those who had once been lost, now living not behind him, not beneath him, but beside him.